pattern readers. I'm Rebecca, and welcome to this discussion of the Wheel of Time episodes 201 to 203. I'm going to take a hot minute to explain who I am and what kind of perspective you will get if you follow this channel for Wheel of Time show discussion, in case you are new to reading the pattern. If you have been following my channel and you want to jump right into episode discussion, check the timestamp on the screen. There is a ton of Wheel of Time content being made these days. You will no doubt find wonderful videos explaining every Easter egg in these episodes, and you'll definitely find some very entertaining non-reader reaction videos. Unfortunately, you will also find some book fans raging about every woke change from the source material. I am a longtime reader and book fan. I am also someone who genuinely loves adaptations, and I don't mean just when their primary aim is similarity to source material. I am truly fascinated by the way stories change from one medium to another and the reasons for those changes. So I go into the show from that perspective, and I am going to be looking at some of the most interesting choices made in this adaptation, giving my perspective on the reasons for those choices, without assuming that similarities are automatically good and changes are automatically bad. So I am aiming for nuance here, even though nuance is dead on the internet and YouTube hates it. But if that's your thing, please do subscribe and continue watching. Adaptation aside, these were some excellent quality episodes of television, and that is important to keep in mind when considering the choices being made. Ultimately, the show has to try and stand on its own and work for the majority of viewers who are non-readers. What is going to make this story work on screen in this 8-episode per season format with 8 seasons total if all goes to plan? We cannot lose sight of that. One of the biggest misconceptions I see is some fans thinking that adaptations can get by just trimming down the material, cutting out less important bits, etc. And they get mad when they see shows adding scenes that weren't in the books. And this just shows a basic misunderstanding of adapting material from one medium to another. There always have to be additions to make it work, especially in a series this long and complex, being pared down to 64 hours of television. If you can't reimagine how to tell key beats and themes and character moments in different ways, you can't do an adaptation like this. In terms of spoilers, because season 2 is drawing heavily from books 2 and 3, you should assume I will make some general references to material through the end of the Dragon Reborn in this video. But I am avoiding big stuff in the books that could potentially ruin reveals in future episodes. So you can potentially watch this video as a non-reader depending on your comfort level with some book comparisons. But if you are reading, definitely don't watch until you've read through book 3 and of course watched episode 3. I am going to be discussing these episodes as a whole because they really flowed together. And after the season is finished, when we have the perspective of all 8 episodes, I'll probably do more detailed analyses of each episode individually. So let's discuss each major plotline so far, starting with Maureen and Lan. This one, by necessity, had to involve a lot of expansions beyond the source material because the book material for these characters is fairly thin in books 2 and 3. We do have some Maureen perspectives, but they don't do much more than establish the goals she has and the stakes for her character. I don't think it's really a spoiler to say that Maureen doesn't really begin to have a true character arc until book 4. This is a problem for other characters at different points in the series as well. Because it's so massive with so many characters, there are major characters who have no arc or even no plot for a whole book or more at a time, and that just won't fly for a major character in an ensemble TV show. If they're on screen as a series regular throughout the season, they need to have an arc. As the basis for their plot so far, the show has drawn mostly from a scene in the middle of book 2, where Lan and Maureen visit a pair of Aes Sedai, seeking obscure information that would help Maureen in her quest, and they also have conflict over their bond. There's also a lot of similarity to what Maureen is doing at the beginning of book 3, where she is camped out in an out-of-the-way location, and informants are coming to her with information. The story of how they met was also taken directly from the books. The biggest addition and the major source of individual character conflicts for both Maureen and Lan, as well as the pair of them and their relationship, started at the end of season 1, when Maureen masked her bond with Lan and then was cut off from touching the One Power. That leaves her without her channeling ability, and both of them without the benefits of the bond, including being able to know how the other is feeling without talking about it. Lan also was without the added abilities he usually has access to from the bond. He couldn't sense the fades before they attacked, as he should have been able to, and his fighting abilities aren't quite as stellar as they would be with the bond. Compared to their fight scene in episode 101, the difference is stark. Adding this challenge demands that the show actually explore what this means for these characters, and they are doing that, and it is painful. In terms of Maureen and Lan's relationship, there's a great deal of similarity to what happens in Book 2, when Maureen tells Lan that, in the event of her death, she has made arrangements to automatically pass his bond to another Aes Sedai, a green named Mirel, who doesn't appear to be a character in the show. It looks like Alana is most likely absorbing that character. This is an unheard of practice that Maureen takes without giving Lan any choice, in order to protect him, given that she has planned putting herself in a lot of danger and is willing to die if necessary to help the Dragon Reborn. And he is furious about it. So there is a fracture in their relationship in the books, but the choices in the show greatly expand upon and explore that fracture as a major source of conflict in this plotline. I think Maureen pushes Lan away because she doesn't think she will get her ability or their bond back, and she feels guilty keeping him tied to her when she can't offer him anything in return. It's another way of protecting him, much like planning to pass his bond in the books. My prediction is that Maureen will recover her ability to channel if the shield can be removed later this season, and her bond with Lan will be restored, but the fracture between them that has been exposed, that they don't know how to communicate with each other, that Maureen didn't treat Lan as an equal, and he isn't fine with that, those things will have longer lasting consequences. Let's talk about how the supporting characters in this plot are being used. Bail Domon makes an appearance as one of Maureen's sources of information, and I love this. Bail Domon is a very flexible character in Robert Jordan's books. He shows up in two very different ways in the first two books, and though I won't say more than that, if you've read at least the first three books, you probably wouldn't be surprised to see him show up again one way or another. Domon gets around on his ship, the Spray, and he always seems to know a lot more than he should, so he was an excellent choice as a character to use for this purpose, knowing that he will probably be of use again. Varen is a pretty prominent character in Book 2, and she continues to be a relevant supporting character in other books, but given some of the changes to the Hunt for the Horn plotline, it wouldn't make sense for Varen to just repeat the role she played in that. I think a lot of fans predicted that Varen could be used instead as the brown sister Maureen goes to when seeking obscure knowledge, and that's exactly what has been done so far. Because of this, the show kept only one of the other Aes Sedai in that part of the book, Adelius, who I would call kind of a hybrid character in the show. Adelius in the book is also a brown, but her personality in the show is screaming green Aja to me. She's a really fun foil to Varen. One key scene for Varen in the show is her reveal to Maureen that she has reasoned out that Maureen knows who is the Dragon Reborn, and this is a very familiar scene to one in the book where Varen reveals to Maureen and Swan that she has figured out their secret about the Dragon Reborn. It's a key character moment because it shows us that Varen isn't a brown sister who never looks beyond books. She is also keenly observant about what is happening around her, and it gives Maureen pause that someone has figured out a secret she has scrupulously kept for decades. Can she trust Varen as an ally in this knowledge or not? The very same conflict arises from both book and show scenes, so that was well done. Now let's talk about the White Tower plotline so far. First of all, the variety of scenes, the new novices accepted in Aes Sedai, the warder training grounds, all do a lot to show us what life in the White Tower is like. In Season 1, none of our major characters lived in the tower, and now they do, and the difference really comes across. The show is taking a slightly different approach to building up the change in relationship between Egwene and Nynaeve. Going to the White Tower also changes their relationship in the books, though it's very gradual. But there, the conflict stems largely from Nynaeve holding on to the authority gap that she is used to having over Egwene for too long. She still acts like the wisdom, even when the two of them are on equal footing in the tower, and Egwene begins to chafe at this. Here, Egwene's resentment stems from being overlooked. She is powerful, but not compared with Nynaeve, and no one seems to want to talk to her about anything but Nynaeve. She tries her hardest at everything. No one is more eager to learn than Egwene, but that doesn't seem to count for as much. Even with that rift, though, if anything, I think we see the love between them just as strongly, maybe more. Elaine had a really spot-on introduction. Her mix of slightly out-of-touch royalty with eager and genuine warmth, her firm resolve, and curious experimenting all came through. It was an interesting choice to have her just arriving at the tower, but it worked because her character comes across so fully. I think the audience will like her right away, and she has already shared a hugely emotional moment with Egwene, so their friendship will have a good basis. I can't wait to see her start to interact with Nynaeve. Nynaeve's struggles are very much what they are in her early experiences in the tower in the books. She can't channel on command because of her block. Expectations are very high for her because of her raw ability. She doesn't trust or vibe with Aes Sedai, and she's very ambivalent about being there. The show is continuing to develop Nynaeve's stronger bond with warders, and I like that. Nynaeve's personality would make it much easier for her to understand warders than Aes Sedai. Through this scene with Maxim and Yvonne, we start to get to the heart of Nynaeve's arc in the tower for now. She needs to figure out what is her reason for being there. Liandrin, of all people, actually pushes her towards this, I think, when she brings her to see an accepted, healing a child with the illness that almost killed Egwene when she was a child. Liandrin probably just wanted to convince Nynaeve to take the accepted test so she could train her, but still, healing is pulling on the right threads for Nynaeve. Liandrin, I have to say, is so much more developed and layered in the show than she is in the books. I think it makes it really hard to know what all of her motivations are. She seems genuinely upset when she thinks Nynaeve dies. But why does she care about Nynaeve? Is it just for her power? I like that we can't be sure. She doesn't seem bothered at all that a novice died under her care, and she therefore can't train novices. The biggest change here is the fact that she has a son, an elderly son who is quite sick, and she doesn't want anyone to know about him. And she loves him, that much is clear, but so many other questions have been raised. It definitely shows that female channelers have very extended lives, and it humanizes Liandrin. It's a really interesting and unexpected choice, and I wonder what more will come of it. Alana is the other really well-developed Aes Sedai in this plot. She's such a contrast to Liandrin, but so interesting and really enjoyable in her own way. I love the care they put into the details with her, the way she is always snacking on fruit, the way she switches so effortlessly from chatting like a close girlfriend to Egwene about threesomes to giving her a spot-on assessment of her channeling difficulties. There's just A+ characterization here. Of course, we have to talk about Nynaeve's accepted test. The content of the second two visions were fairly similar to their book counterparts. In the second arch, she's back in the Two Rivers and people need help from a wisdom, and instead of Nynaeve, they are under the care of someone who is harming them. In the third arch, she sees herself married to Lan and having a child with him. I really appreciate that they gave us the much more emotionally potent first arch vision, where we see Nynaeve as a child losing her parents, although it's devastating. But the most important differences are in the third arch. I'm glad we see their potential life in the Two Rivers rather than Malkier, because it brings in more people Nynaeve loves now. Ultimately, what all of these visions are intended to do is force Nynaeve to choose the White Tower over anyone else that she has ever loved. And Nynaeve isn't willing to do this. Even in the end, when she finally goes through that third arch, she carries the vision of her daughter with her. And this is really key to understanding her character arc. Although the show added Nynaeve being gone so long in the arch that people think she's dead, it did happen similarly in the book that the arch disappeared, Nynaeve almost doesn't return, and it has to come back a second time, which it isn't supposed to, and when she returns, everyone is freaking out on the other side. So we get to see a bit more of how other characters react to thinking she is dead. Overall, I think it all worked well, but I do think the show has to go a little easier on the fake out deaths going forward. That's really the only negative I have to say about it. Overall, the emotional impact of actually getting to see what Nynaeve goes through in those arches, it hit so hard on screen. It was powerful. Well, let's move on to Rand's plotline. There are three major elements taken so far from Rand's plotlines in books 2 and 3. First, Rand is off on his own, as he is in book 3, and while alone, struggling with fear about being unable to control the One Power, and trying hard not to channel at all, as he does in book 2. Next, they've put him in place in Cairhien, an important location for him in book 2. Now, he's far more settled in this location than he ever was in the books, but it allows the possibility of getting into Cairhien politics, which we see maybe the start of in episode 3. Finally, there's his relationship with Selene, a very important dynamic that starts in book 2. So these are the book elements they've decided to focus on for Rand so far, but let's talk about how they are different in the show and why. Selene in book 2 is a young Cairhienan noblewoman and love interest that Rand meets on his travels when he is dressed as a lord and routinely mistaken for one. Rand has no reason to be dressed as a lord yet at the start of the season, so instead, Selene is an innkeeper in the Foregate, the poorer part of Cairhien. That change gives them a plausible reason for them to have connected, whereas it would be odd for a noblewoman to give a man living in the slums of the Foregate the time of day. Their relationship is obviously far more intimate from the start, and there's some definite hints of this being a pretty unhealthy dynamic between the two. I think the added maturity here is in keeping with the way the show has made all the romantic relationships more mature. Rand and Egwene were fully in love and having sex in season 1 because they were being written as characters of about 20 instead of teenagers. And the show has taken out the element of the books where Two Rivers folk treat premarital sex as taboo. This brings the characters more in line with most of Robert Jordan's world, which is more sex positive. Given that Rand is trying to completely cut ties with his past, it makes sense he would be more inclined to allow himself to be with a woman who apparently doesn't mind sleeping with him while actively thinking about her ex. I also really like how the show used Selene as Rand's introduction to Cairhienin nobility, because even under Rand's changed circumstances, him accidentally getting swept up in the politics of the city was a pretty important part of his Book 2 plot. So I am glad the show seems to be finding a different way to make that happen. Now, I have to say something quickly that will spoil a reveal for later in the season. So if you haven't read at least through book 4, skip ahead now to this timestamp. So obviously Selene is Lanfear. I love that they have made her smarter in how she manipulates Rand, but still finding a way to steer him to finding his power and importance. But the biggest thing this change of them being intimate will do is raise the stakes hugely once Rand realizes who she is. Now she has much more of a potential hold on him. When he starts wondering, is a Forsaken really trying to help me? And he has a hard time fighting her. This history between the two of them is going to make that a lot more potent. I think they had to put her more on par with Egwene in terms of how significant of an ex she will be to Rand, and not let it all be past life stuff. So I'm excited for this. Having Rand work in this sanitarium, I guess we are calling it, sure seems like he is playing a long game to get to Loghain. It looked like maybe it was just a loss of control at first when he attacked Jan, but it also seems like that was calculated to allow him to get to Loghain. There's also the secondary purpose of showing us who Rand is at his heart through his compassionate connection with Errol. Errol also gives Rand a way to start learning how to use a sword. But I love that Rand is trying to get some answers from the only person he has ever heard of who might have some for him. He seems to desperately want someone to tell him how he can avoid channeling and avoid going mad. This is very in keeping with Rand in early books when he is running away from this terrifying truth about himself. These two characters have something very rare in common, so having them interact was great. It also allowed the show to bring back a key moment from book 1, which gets explained later, that Loghain sees Rand and realizes what he must be. They've changed it to Loghain having a talent for seeing men who can channel instead of a talent for seeing ta'veren. But it helps to have that specificity in this scene, and it achieves a similar effect. These Loghain interactions serve to offer up a hope of salvation for Rand, which is then quickly dashed when he realizes that Loghain is lost to the madness or his grief or both at this point, and he can't help him. But I'm glad that was an avenue Rand pursued before he might have to be forced to consider other choices, because clearly he's not in control. Not having Rand be involved in the hunt for the Horn allows that plotline to be more Perrin-focused, and we finally get a chance for Perrin to shine as a character. His conversation with Ingtar and his words in his letters to Nynaeve and Egwene, and the callback to Beltane, floating a lantern for Layla, and almost being ready to give up his wedding ring, but not quite. These were all excellent moments for him where we get a deeper understanding of his struggles. There are actually quite a few very similar scenes drawn directly from early chapters of Book 2. But the several-month time skip between seasons allows Perrin's party to have tracked Fane much closer to Falma already at this point, so that plotline can be moved along. One change that makes so much sense that most book fans called it long ago is that the character of Elias would be used as the party's magical tracker instead of the character Huron from the books. This allows the character to serve two purposes at once: help the Shienarans track Fane, and starting to introduce Perrin to whatever connection is happening between him and the wolves. Elias's golden eyes, which do not change, give us a visual indication that whatever connection Perrin has with wolves, Elias has it too, and much more firmly established clearly. So Elias will be a source of information for Perrin about what actually is happening here. We already see that Perrin is having some sort of visions, and as Elias says, he needs to learn to distinguish those from reality. By episode 2, we get our first real introduction to the Shan-Chan, a benefit of the time skip bringing Perrin closer to Falma. We will get more time this season with these major antagonists. The introduction is chilling between the Damani and Suldam in action, rounding up women who can channel, and the way High Lady Sarath's voice, Alwyn, explains the oaths they expect. There are two major additions here. Some of our characters in this group are captured, and one dies immediately and horrifically when he will not swear the oaths. Non-readers don't have a lot of familiarity with Uno, But we have seen him have friendly and funny interactions with Lan last season and Loyal and Perrin this season, so that earns him some likability. And even if you aren't invested in him, the sheer brutality with which the Shan-Chan end him is enough to make a visceral impact. This is a change for book readers. Uno does not die in this way in the books. I won't say whether he dies differently later or not, but yeah, the show clearly wanted us to start off hating the Shan-Chan, and I must say it works. The second big change is that we see a Shamael, who now has a name and has been established as one of the Forsaken, not the Dark One himself, but possibly his most powerful follower, openly supporting and influencing the Shan-Chan as some kind of advisor. This is pretty fitting with the way many of the Forsaken do operate in the books. I think it remains to be seen what impact this will have, but for now, it does bring him into contact with Perrin. Of course, he would recognize Perrin from his dreams and know that he is ta'veren and a potential ally of the Dragon Reborn. Shamael gives Perrin a specific reason to be afraid of his connection with the wolves, and that fear will be important to Perrin's character arc. Although, when a Shamael says that the more wolf he is, the more he belongs to the shadow, we would all do well to remember that we have been told twice now that a Shamael is known as the father of lies. Finally, Matt's plot, I think I have to point out, is not necessarily what it would have been if that actor who played Matt in season 1, Barney Harris, had not left the show before he could film episodes 7 and 8. So having Matt, now played by Donal Finn, locked in a room by Leandrin for a few episodes probably wasn't how it was originally planned. I did honestly wish we could get a plot similar to Matt's in book 3. So compared with that, this is a slower start. But I did really like the decision to have him meet Min. Getting entangled with Aes Sedai because of her unique ability to see pieces of the pattern is in keeping with some of her book plot. For instance, Maureen sending her to the White Tower in book 3. These are two characters who I don't think have this much interaction in the books, but they're both really fun characters, and I'm very much enjoying seeing them together and look forward to where this might be going. It's fun because it is different, and I can't exactly predict what is going to happen. It's pretty obvious Leandrin is manipulating Matt, and I have to imagine she is probably manipulating Min too in some way, but I can't comment on that too much until we see how it plays out. Similarly, while we get this vision of Min's being added, where it appears like Matt might be stabbing Rand, I can't really comment too much on that until we see what that turns out to mean. Character-wise for Matt, the show is layering in more of a struggle with feeling like he doesn't have a purpose, that he is worthless and not able to help the ones he loves. The audience has been told he is ta'veren and has a part to play, but he doesn't know that, and we know he has been told he is worthless before. I do like having those deeper layers. Matt in book 3 starts to reveal that he is someone who acts like he doesn't want to get involved, but will actually put himself way out there at risk to help his friends. Here, his reasons for holding back aren't glib. It has to do with self-doubt, so I think the payoff will be deeper for him, and I love that. Leandrin's last scene with him really hammers on his deepest insecurities, and then we see how he goes to Egwene, sees she is struggling, and wants to help, but can't. So this is, I believe, setting Matt up for a much bigger progression in his character arc. There is a lot more to say about these episodes, and like I said before, I think doing detailed analyses of each episode after the season is complete is something I would like to do. Let me know if that is something you are interested in seeing. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion so far and will subscribe. Leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts on these episodes and how the show is working as an adaptation. To me, the show and the books are really their own separate things and each so interesting to discuss. So to me, having a conversation that doesn't go beyond this is bad because this wasn't in the books is just not interesting, and I hope we can do better. Until next time, gird your loins, my friends.